morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here at the Oregon Department of Energy's public hearing on our application to the U.S. Department of Energy's Grid Resilience Program. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Janine Benner, and I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm really pleased to be here today. Today's meeting is specifically to discuss a program created in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act under Section 40101D. And this is actually our second hearing on the topic. The previous hearing was held last August, and since that time, the application deadline was extended by the U.S. Department of Energy. We've learned a lot more details from the U.S. Department of Energy, and we've been able to receive feedback from interested parties on the initial ideas that we presented back then in August. The program narrative and public hearing today covers our revised approach to this program, and it also covers, excuse me, 2 state allocations, providing what we refer to as our first and second year funding all at one time. So this means that we are anticipating being able to award more funds in this initial year than in the years that follow. Because of the format of this webinar and the number of people in attendance, we have everyone muted currently, all the attendees. But as we go through the presentation, we'll pause for questions. And at that point, people can raise their hands and we'll be able to unmute you to ask questions. We'd also encourage you to use the chat function on WebEx if you have questions you want to put in writing. And then at the end, we'll have dedicated time for further questions and public comments. So in addition to responding during this webinar, you can also enter your thoughts and feedback through an online portal that we've set up if you would like more space to respond, more time to consider your responses, or if you don't feel comfortable speaking out in a meeting like this. And I will ask my colleague Jen to put the link to the portal in the chat so that you will have it available for you. And it will be open through the end of this week. We've got a pretty quick turnaround on this particular opportunity. You'll see that in the chat in a moment, and I'm hoping Jen can also put a link in the chat to the narrative that we are going to go through today and asking people for feedback on. So in a minute, I'm going to go over some logistics on how to use WebEx, but at this point, I would ask everyone, including the Oregon Department of Energy staff on the line, to please introduce themselves in the chat. So if you can just enter your name, and if there's an organization you're affiliated with, we'd be really happy to see who's here with us this morning. Next slide, please. Okay, so for those of you who are new to WebEx, here's a quick guide on how to use some of the features. As I mentioned before, attendees are off camera and muted, but our host will unmute you if we call on you to ask questions. You can see the option to raise your hand on both the right-hand side of your screen under Participants, under the Participants panel if you click near your name. There's also an option at the bottom of your screen where you can see a visual of a hand in the reactions bar. As I mentioned, feel free to use the chat function to ask questions or make comments. And if you do that, please send to all panelists or to everyone so that all of the ODO staff can see the question and help respond. We'll try to get to as many questions in the chat and through raised hands as we can, but we may not have time for all of them today. Please notice that we will keep a record of that and try to follow up with you where possible. I also noticed if we have people who called in on the phone, you can press *6 to raise your hand and *3 to unmute yourself when we call on you. So I also want to make sure that folks know that today's hearing is being recorded and that a list of attendees will also be posted to our website later today. I know it's hard for attendees to see the list of other attendees, so we'll make sure to get that on our website. All right, hopefully that is clear, and by now people have used all of these different platforms. Next slide, please. So here's the agenda. There's a lot to get through today. And the first part of today's meeting is going to focus on the grid resilience funding opportunity in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the way that Congress and the US DOE structure the program, and the requirements that fall to ODO on behalf of the state to submit an application. My colleague, Emily Salmeri, who is our new federal grants officer, will be leading this part of the presentation. The second part of the presentation will be information about the state's approach. and my colleague, Rob Del Mar, from our Planning and Innovation Division, will be speaking about the specifics of Oregon's program. And then finally, we will look for your feedback on the state's approach. So we'll try to stop and ask for questions during the presentation, but please know that many of your questions may be answered as we go through the material, so feel free to hold those till the end. My colleague Jen Senner, our other grants officer, will be helping to keep an eye on the chat as we go through the presentation. And finally, my colleague Linda Ross is our host today and will be helping also to keep an eye open for questions. We are joined by some team members from a consulting firm called Hagerty Consulting, who are assisting Odo with planning for this application and program launch, and we'll introduce the project managers for Hagerty at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, before we jump into the grid resilience fun stuff, a quick introduction to the Oregon Department of Energy, or ODO, as you might hear us referred to. On this slide, you see our vision, mission, and what we do. Our mission is to help Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. Under the What We Do section on this slide, you'll see the services we provide and how we achieve our mission. And this funding opportunity that we're discussing today will certainly help Odo support a more resilient and affordable energy system in Oregon. Next slide, please. So before I turn it over to Emily, just to highlight the three objectives that we have for our time together today. First, we want to make sure that you understand how this grid resilience funding works and the parameters that Odo has to work within when designing the state's program. This is a huge opportunity to bring federal dollars to Oregon to help make our electric grid more resilient. Second, we want to share with you our revised approach for this funding and what we're planning to put in our application to the U.S. Department of Energy. This approach has been developed over the past 9 months in close consultation with the Oregon Public Utility Commission, and it's informed by outreach with experts working in this space. We want to especially thank those of you that submitted information through our previous public hearing and comment session last August, and our request for information conducted in December. We've considered that feedback and made adjustments to our approach from last summer. But even with those adjustments, we still want to hear from you on the program design and application and get your ideas for how to improve it today. Remember, the draft proposal that we're sharing with you today is just that. It's a draft. We do want input and feedback to make it better, to align with work already being done by utilities and others, and to better meet the objectives outlined in the federal funding opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, we will have time for verbal public comment at the end, and we also hope people will submit written comments through our online portal if you don't want to or don't get a chance to speak today, or if you have more to say. Again, that portal will be open to the end of the week. Our application is due to the U.S. Department of Energy at the end of the month, so we are working to get this all wrapped up pretty quickly. Next slide, please. All right, and now I would like to turn this over to Emily Salmeri, who will share more information on the federal bill that created this opportunity. Emily.
Thank you, Janine, and good morning, everyone. The program that we're talking about today is specifically funded under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This piece of legislation includes $62 billion from the U.S. Department of Energy to deliver a more equitable, clean energy future for the American people by investing in American manufacturing and workers, expanding access to energy efficiency and clean energy for families, communities, and businesses, delivering reliable, clean, and affordable power to more Americans, and building the technologies of tomorrow through clean energy demonstrations. Additionally, this program, like other federal energy programs, is covered by the Justice 40 initiative. This federal initiative directs 40% of the benefits should flow to disadvantaged communities. Back to you, Janine.
Thanks, Emily. After the passage of both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act at the end of last year and the Inflation Reduction, actually, I guess it was more than the end of last year, got my years mixed up, but after that bill and the Inflation Reduction Act last summer, Odo recognized that the state would be receiving millions of dollars from the federal government to invest in clean energy, energy efficiency, and resilience, among many other important opportunities. So through a series of public webinars, discussions with our Energy Advisory Work Group and other interested parties, we developed the principles that you see on this slide to help guide our overall approach to the federal funding for all of the programs in addition to grid resilience. So I won't read all of these word for word, but you can see that we are hoping to consider equity at every step, and that includes geographic diversity. We want to make sure that the benefits of this funding make it to the Oregonians who need it most and are distributed equitably around the state. In designing the programs and distributing funding, we will coordinate with tribal governments as much as possible and communicate clearly, inclusively, and efficiently to ensure that stakeholders and the public are informed and supported. Where possible and where internal resources allow, we hope to provide technical assistance to build community capacity and support grant recipients. There's actually a position funded in the governor's requested budget to help us do this. We're working across agencies to leverage expertise and support historically underinvested work to further energy and climate goals and to provide other community benefits. And we'll also try to take advantage of high priority funding opportunities while also ensuring quality work that puts every available dollar to its best use. So these are the principles that we are applying across all of our work on federal funding as we think about program design and implementation. And hopefully you'll see how the program that we're talking about today is aligned with these. Next slide, please. And back to Emily.
All right, so the purpose of the funds as outlined by the U.S. Department of Energy is to improve the all hazards resilience of the electrical grid against disruptive events, generate the greatest community benefit in reducing the likelihood and consequences of disruptive events, advance DOE's equity, environmental, and energy justice priorities, including the Justice 40 initiative, and invest in the America's workforce. Next slide, please. This application to the U.S. Department of Energy is nearing submission. We are required to submit a request to U.S. DOE by March 31st, 2023 for the first two allocations of funds under this federal program. ODO is the state agency that will apply for, receive, and administer these funds. Next slide, please. Under this program, states, tribes, and territories apply directly to the federal government. Once awarded, these grant recipients can then run processes to issue subawards to entities eligible as subrecipients, such as an electric grid operator, an electricity storage operator, an electricity generator, a transmission owner or operator, a distribution provider, and a fuel supplier. It is ODO's intent to focus on electric utilities. Next slide, please. Although the legislation contemplates allocations over 5 years, U.S. DOE intends to issue the first and second allocations of funding at the same time, accounting for the extended application deadline. The first two allocations for the state are listed on the slide, both a little less than $10 million. This program does have two match requirements. First, the state or tribes are required to provide a 15% match. Secondly, subrecipients are then required to provide a match as well. Subrecipients will be required to match at a rate of either 100% or 1/3, depending on their electricity sales in the previous year. Next slide, please. And while this list is not exhaustive, some of the eligible activities permitted under this award are weatherization technologies and equipment, fire-resistant technologies and fire prevention systems, monitoring and control technologies, the undergrounding of electrical equipment, utility pole management, the relocation of power lines or the reconductoring of power lines with low lag advanced conductors, vegetation and fuel load management, and many more. However, funds are not allowed to be used for a new electric generating facility or a large-scale battery storage facility or cybersecurity. We've learned since our last public hearing that US DOE considers solar panels to be a part of a new electricity generation. So while in general microgrids are allowable, grant and match funds would not be able to pay for solar panels as part of a microgrid installation. Next slide, please. Federal funds will come with requirements that apply to the whole project. These are some of the provisions that potential subrecipients may want to familiarize themselves with. Highlights include Davis-Bacon Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and Build America, Buy America. OTA will provide pre-application technical assistance on these topics as appropriate and our resources allow. Next slide, please. And now I'd like to hand it over to Rob Del Mar.
There we go. Good morning, all. My name is Rob Del Mar, and I'm a senior policy analyst with Oregon Department of Energy. And I'd like to go over some of the preliminary program design features that we've got in the program. And here we see the high-level objectives of the proposed grid resilience program, and these align with what we've described in the narrative. And first, we want to focus on making investments in natural hazard mitigation projects. And you may recall from the public hearing last August that we originally planned to focus solely on wildfire in year one. We've since had a chance to communicate with more utilities and found that in many service territories, hazards such as wind and snow and ice storms actually rank higher than wildfire as a highest risk to the utility. Next is community benefits and equity. And we really want to maximize equity by supporting projects that provide benefits to disadvantaged communities. Third, maximizing community benefits. We want to support investments in projects that are ready to go and can deliver immediate community benefits. And in addition to expediency, we're looking for feedback on how community benefits should be defined and demonstrated, and how to evaluate these benefits and how to evaluate whether or not a project is really ready to go. And finally, we want to engage with stakeholders throughout this project to design objectives, metrics, and criteria to guide implementation of future years of funding. So years 3 through 5, we will be applying for in the future, and we want to work with all of you to ensure that we have a program that continues to work for our stakeholders. As Emily mentioned earlier, Oregon's formula allocation of funds is expected to be just shy of $10 million per year for a total program funding of approximately $50 million over 5 years. In the first allocation, we expect about $19.9 million, which represents the first 2 years of funding. There is a 5% limitation on these funds that describes that at least 95% of funds are to be made available as grants to eligible entities and subrecipients. And the remaining funds, the 5%, can be used to support program administration, information sharing, and technical assistance. We also have a small utility set aside. The funding actually requires that a minimum amount of grant funds be made available to small utilities equal to no less than the percentage of customers served by those utilities. And so in Oregon, based on the numbers, this minimum would be 25%. That's the number of customers that are served by small utilities in Oregon. But we propose rounding that number up to 30% so that we can exceed the federal compliance requirements. And you may recall that we proposed a 40% carve out in the public hearing last August. And since that time, we've gotten some guidance from US DOE, which caused us to move Umatilla Electric Co-op into the large utility category. And that affects the split between the large and small utilities because they have more than 10% of the state's load, their sales. So even though we've reduced the percentage of the carve out for small utilities, we've also proposed increasing the maximum award size for small utilities. And this is because our initial budget is about twice what we were expecting in August. And this will be spelled out in more detail in the coming slides. I believe we have a question.
We do, yes. Jennifer Jolly has a question. Linda, can you go ahead and unmute Jennifer, please? Go ahead.
I didn't know if are you taking feedback on the proposal today, or are you just explaining it?
We're definitely
are-
taking feedback. We
Okay,
have
well, I
time.
would just say that the small utilities that I represent, were really disappointed to see the reduction from 40% to 30% in the proposal for small utilities, given the number of utilities that are competing for this small pie. And so we'll be providing more written comments on that, but it seemed like the rationale that was given in August that the larger utilities were in a better position to compete for competitive grid resilience funding would still stand, and that any error in the calculation for Umatilla being a large utility should fall on the larger utilities. So that's a piece of feedback that we'll be submitting.
Thanks, Jennifer. We'd love to have that feedback and appreciate you raising it. And I just want to, I'll turn it over to Rob to explain further, but it wasn't an error in a calculation. It was the change in the status of Umatilla Electric that really resulted in some math change for us since August. So Rob, if you want to just sort of clarify how we landed on that number, but again, happy to have feedback.
Yeah, that is very valuable feedback, and I'll go through some numbers in some tables that are coming up in some slides. But originally, we had proposed to US DOE that we do a 5-year running average to try to bring Umatilla's customer base and load base into the small utility category. But we got some clarification from US DOE that we need to use the previous year's sales according to EIA, and those numbers have Umatilla Electric well above the 4 million megawatt hour mark that separates these. So I will jump into this next table that shows the numbers for the large utility category. And this table demonstrates the draft funding distribution for large utilities. As a reminder, these large utilities are those with sales exceeding 4 million megawatt hours per year. And the table shows each of the large utilities with their share of annual sales and proportional maximum grant awards. And so that bottom row, the 13% of sales from Umatilla Electric, is what brought us from around 35 or 36% for small utilities in our first proposal. Taking that 13% to the large utilities brought us down to about 25% of sales in the small utilities. So hopefully this will be more clear as I go through a few more slides. And yeah, the purpose of all of this is certainly to get feedback from stakeholders. So we're happy to hear what you all think of this. So this slide shows similar information for small utilities. And rather than calculate a separate value for each utility based on percentage of load, as we propose for the larger utilities, we propose a maximum incentive of $600,000 in the small utility category. And this is another number that we would like your feedback on. Recognize a need to balance between having sufficient dollars available for each individual project, but also maximizing the number of projects that we can support in any given round. So this shows the percentage of customers represented by each of our different small utility categories. And again, we have about 25% of customers served by these smaller utilities, and about 27% of energy sales represented by these small utilities. And again, we proposed rounding that up to 30% as the carve out.
Hey, Rob, looks like we have a couple questions on that chart. Tucker has a question in the chat. Is this 600,000 max per year or per project?
That's a good question. And as we get further into the program design, we're going to determine how many funding opportunities we may open up in a given year. And so this is the max per award. But if we have more than one funding cycle and one utility comes into, both cycles with an excellent project, I think that our thinking now is that the most competitive projects are going to be the ones to move forward in any given funding opportunity. So it would be possible for a utility to exceed that amount in a year. Although there's other forces that are trying to spread the dollars around the state and maximize benefits, so that may not be likely within our competitive review of projects.
And I see Jennifer has her hand raised as well. Again, if Linda, we can bring Jennifer off mute to ask her question. There you go, Jennifer.
Okay. Is previously the proposal was 400,000, and so I'm just trying to track the rationale that you cited for the change is that it's representing a 2-year period, or I guess I'm not tracking what the rationale for the increase was.
Yeah, that was our rationale. The original proposal was 400,000, and under that initial allocation, again, based on 40% of a smaller pot of total funds, that would have gotten us about 10 awards if everyone came in at the maximum. And so this proposed bump up essentially keeps us at the minimum of 10 awards per cycle, again, if everyone came in at the maximum. And so it is, like you say, Jennifer, just reflecting the higher year one budget because we get the 2 allocations in our first year's pot of money.
I guess given the number of qualifying projects that I know small utilities are going to have, and probably maybe the match requirement for some of the smaller utilities, I think that the 400 makes more sense, so that other utilities with qualifying projects can also get a piece of the pie, since it's so limited here. Whereas the large utilities have a guarantee that if they have qualifying projects, they're going to get an allocation. So I guess that would be my feedback.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. And there's one other thing I should mention, and maybe I'll bump into the next slide. The total budget allocation for the large utilities based on their percentage of the state sales is the maximum amount that the large utilities can get. However, they will be competing with all of the other projects in any given round. And if they submit projects that the evaluation committee or process determines to be less competitive than other projects submitted in the small utility category, the small utilities will have the ability to pull funds out of the large pot again in this competitive grant environment. So we don't know exactly how that's going to shake out. It'll vary by funding cycle, but they will still have to compete for those funds on a competitive basis.
Okay, that wasn't clear in the narrative to me. So basically, everyone's competing for the 9.9 or okay.
That's correct. And you're right that it wasn't that clear in the narrative. We made a reference to, I believe, a minimum score or minimum qualifications for projects. So that'll be one cutoff, but we will still have a full competitive review of all projects in every cycle. And so the 30% carve out is the minimum, which again gets us to exceeding the federal requirements. And we are happy to take comments from stakeholders on that number. We're just following the federal guidelines for the carve out as it's described.
But that's a minimum, right? In the federal statute, that's not you could exceed that as proposed initially, which was 40%, correct?
Yeah, and that's, yeah, that minimum that we have to hit is 25% according to the numbers that we get from the EIA and Oregon Utility Statistics.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think I need to go through this table again and again with the proposed carve out for small utilities. If everyone came in at that max award of 600,000, it would give us 10 projects. And if we bump that number down to 400,000, and we would love to have more feedback on that, obviously there would be more awards depending on where we hit for the max award for small utilities. And for the large utilities, again, it will depend on the number and types of projects that we get in each round. But we don't know how many projects we're likely to see in those categories. It depends if they come in with large projects or with multiple small projects. So in addition to budget carve-outs for large and small utilities, we'll have other budget targets associated with the final program. We propose spending 100% of funds on natural hazard mitigation projects. Again, will be true for the first 2 years. Additionally, federal requirements will also require that at least 40% of funds support projects that bring benefits to disadvantaged communities. Oops. I understand I'm a little quiet, so I'm going to give everyone a disturbing close-up so that I can get a little closer to the mic. For the first round of funding, we propose using the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool made available from the White House. This is how we will determine, or how we propose to determine, if projects are supporting disadvantaged communities. And the areas shaded in gray on this map are census tracts identified as disadvantaged communities by this tool. And some of the darker gray areas that are shown indicate tribal lands. You can see in the little blow up box the level of detail that you can observe from the tool. So if you zoom into Medford, Oregon, for example, you can see that you get almost like a neighborhood level approach to these disadvantaged communities. We believe this mapping tool provides a simple means of demonstrating when a project serves a disadvantaged community, but we're also willing to consider other ideas if you care to provide other ideas for how we would determine disadvantaged communities when you make comments. And again, we're proposing to make awards with a competitive grant program. Hold on, I guess we have a question.
Rob, we have a question in the chat about what physical security measures to guard against acts of sabotage, whether or not those are permitted. That's a really good question. We have understood from the U.S. Department of Energy that activities that harden and protect the grid will help protect against both natural and man-made hazards. In particular, the monitoring and control technologies that Emily highlighted early on that third bullet could help protect against sabotage. So it won't be a focus of our application, but those types of activities will be eligible for funding.
Yeah, thanks, Janine, and thanks for that question. And we actually we expect that we will have projects that are probably addressing multiple hazards all in one project. Things that protect against physical damage may also protect against wildfire and winter storms. And so we do want to, that's part of how we hope to maximize community benefits by getting multiple benefits out of each project. I'm going to see if I can improve my mic here. Well, I think I'll just try to talk louder and a little closer. Again, we are proposing to make awards using a competitive grant program. Opportunity announcements will be posted for a minimum of 60 days on the Oregon Department of Energy website and will include the application, any prerequisites, a scoring matrix, a Q&A period, and the timeline for the review and the awards. And at the end of each application period, ODO will confirm project eligibility and complete the competitive review. And then, of course, provide notification of successful applications. And with that, I will pass it back to Emily to take the next few slides.
And maybe during the transition between Rob and Emily, we can answer a couple questions that came up in the chat. Robert Mullen wants to confirm that 100% of the first 2 years of funding will be used for natural hazards. And I think the first 2 years of the funding will be used for any of the eligible activities under the program as determined by the US DOE. But Rob, do you want to clarify on that?
That just tried a different mic. Am I heard?
Yes.
Okay.
But you're
Hopefully
quiet.
maybe this one won't be any better, but yes, for the first 2 years, we are proposing funding any of the eligible activities listed in the federal guidance that support natural hazard mitigation projects.
Thanks. And then a question, is there a period of performance defined?
I am not sure how to answer that question, and Jen or Emily, if you know the answer to that one, I would welcome your feedback.
This is Jen Center. So in regards to the period of performance, we anticipate that the Oregon Department of Energy's initial period of performance will be a 5-year time period, which during that time, we anticipate making the initial rounds of grant awards during the first year of that, which would leave the subrecipients approximately 4 years to complete their projects within that 5-year time frame for the Department of Energy. It's currently our understanding that as new allocations become available as part of future planning cycles, then that period of performance at the state level may be extended, but we're not quite clear precisely on how that may affect subrecipients. So this time, I think in an abundance of caution, we'd want to encourage subrecipients to think about projects that could be completed in no more than a 4-year time period.
Thank you, Jen.
All right, on to Emily.
Great, thank you guys. So these are some of the metrics that ODO is considering to measure our progress towards these objectives. These metrics will be incorporated into grant performance agreements where applicable. While we won't read through all these metrics, we invite you to review these in detail as part of our narrative and comment on your ability to measure and report on these items. We particularly seek your feedback on these metrics to help us determine if there are more relevant data sets that we could use to assess our success on this project. Next slide, please. These are some more of the metrics we are considering when measuring community benefits that complement grid resilience projects. Again, these are going to be in the narrative. You can review them more in detail. Next slide, please.
Hey, Emily, we have a couple questions in the chat that are coming up and a raised hand as well. Robert wants to know, how will the competitiveness of projects be determined? What metrics will be used? Will that be determined in collaboration with the PUC? I'll start by saying I think a lot of that will be determined as we, after we submit the narrative, as we work on the funding opportunity announcements. But yes, we will look to collaborate closely with the PUC, but I'll see if Emily or Rob have anything further on that. And then we have Jennifer Jolly again with her hand raised.
Rob, I'm happy to let you answer further if you have further answer on that.
I agree with what Janine said. The specific competitive review criteria and the process for that review are going to be established in the actual program design, which will happen in the coming months and will include a lot of stakeholder feedback opportunities.
Great, thank you. So what we're working on today and receiving opportunity is our narrative to the U.S. Department of Energy that provides enough detail to get the money. And then over the next few months, and we'll talk about this again at the end, we'll be working with you all, guided by our consultants, to really get into the details on questions like scoring the projects. And now, Linda, if you could bring Jennifer Jolly back off mute for her question. Okay, Jennifer, you were off for a moment. There you go.
Thank you. Just looking at the metrics that were proposed in the narrative, it seemed like they were all backward looking, you know, like if you had encountered outages and so forth, rather than maybe looking forward and towards preventative, you know, like, so if you hadn't experienced those, that you wouldn't really meet those objectives. So I guess that would be a question that came to mind. And then I was also wondering about, there's some language in the narrative, and perhaps you'll get to it, about public facilities serving disaster relief efforts, that's getting a priority. So I'm trying to figure out how that works with the criteria that you're going to be evaluating things under, and how that fits in given the types of eligible funding, how these broader community benefits that are supposed to get priority in funding. It was confusing to me.
Thanks. Good feedback on that. And if you have any ideas for metrics that are more forward-looking, that would be easy for us to measure, we would certainly be open for it. And I'll defer to Rob on the second part of that question before we go to our next hand raised.
Yeah, it sounds to me like we need to provide a little more clarification in the narrative as far as, you know, projects that will improve reliability at facilities that may have emergency response value to the community. I think that would be categorized within a broad set of community benefits. And those benefits are one of the things that we really hope to zero in on a good definition during the program design phase for how we prioritize and define community benefits within our scoring matrix.
And then Linda, can you please bring Janine Parisi off mute? There you go, Janine.
Hey, thank you. Janine Parisi, EWEB. Back to metrics, I'm wondering about, as you're thinking about outage frequency, duration, customer counts, will public safety power shutoff events or the avoidance of them be considered as a proactive, kind of forward-thinking objective or metric? And if it's embedded in there, should we make it more explicit, is one question. And then about the Justice 40 screening tool, I'm just wondering if you're considering any other ways to identify disadvantaged communities. And the reason why I ask this is the tool is fantastic. It is easy to use, but you know, I'm not a social demographic expert, but it seemed counterintuitive to me that as I apply this to my service territory upriver, you know, in a place where a mobile home park, you know, was damaged by multiple fires and then devastated Blue River, that is not seen as a disadvantaged community by the tool. So I don't know, exactly how accurate this tool is for smaller and more remote communities. So I'm just wondering if there's, we all want to be addressing the systemic inequities. So I completely value that. I'm just asking if there's other ways that utilities might be able to demonstrate that commitment if the Justice 40 screening tool isn't really telling the full picture.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I'm glad that you've used the tool to zero in at that level of detail. We have left the door open for utilities or communities to propose other means of demonstrating a disadvantaged community. And I think the one you just described is a perfect example of where the tool may fall short, but where we would accept other information that could be provided directly by the community, because again, that tool is limited to census tract level of data. And there's obviously things that happen in communities that don't follow census tract lines. So we will be sure to make it more clear in the narrative that we are open to other means of a community demonstrating that they're serving a disadvantaged community.
Thank you.
And Rob, what do you think about her idea in adding a metric having to do with public safety power shutoffs?
I think that's a great idea. Yep. Anytime we can either eliminate the need to do a PSPS or demonstrate that a shutoff has affected fewer people because of measures that were taken, I think those are perfect metrics for this program.
Great. And Jen, did you have anything you wanted to add on the Justice 40 requirements and the CJust tool?
Yeah, so we will look into options to see if there's any way to go beyond CJust. However, since this is federal funding, we do have to follow the general guidance that's been framed out by the U.S. Department of Energy. And so we'll have to look at that carefully, because we know there's a lot of complexity to understanding equity issues and how that plays out on the ground. And so that's something I think we'll need to consider, but within the framework that has been provided by the federal government.
Thanks for that clarification.
All right. And finally, with these metrics, we hope to refine the future years of the program by considering lessons learned from the first two allocations of program funding. And then I can hand this back to Janine.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. So before we open it up for questions and discussion and comments, I just wanted to highlight a few more ways to engage with us on this today. Being here is one of the many ways. And again, thank you for taking the time this morning. And then this slide outlines some additional ways to stay and get involved. So as we mentioned, you can submit comments on the online portal. Although again, in terms of this draft application, please note that the timeline is pretty tight, the deadline of this Friday. You can partner with your local utility on putting together an application. You can check out job announcements, come work with us to help figure it all out. And then not on here, but getting to our next steps, you hopefully will engage with us as we continue with program design after submitting our application. So next slide, please. So here are those next steps. We intend to review public comments received and feedback to integrate in our final changes to the program narrative, which we will be submitting to the U.S. Department of Energy no later than March 31st, so that we as a state can be eligible to receive this funding. Once we have a final award agreement with the U.S. Department of Energy, which will probably take a while, we will share that document with our approved narrative, and we anticipate that this will occur later this summer. So that's when US DOE would say, yes, okay, we got your narrative, here's your money. Please continue to follow our progress as we consider different aspects of program design and implementation after this submission to the US Department of Energy. And again, I've hinted at this, but we have brought Hagerty Consulting firm on board to work with us to help with some of this engagement. And at this point, I'd actually like to ask the folks we have from Hagerty on the call with us today to come on camera and introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us. I know Katie Toskey and Bryson Shook are on the line as well. If you're able to come on camera just quickly, just to say hi, that would be wonderful. If not, I just want to share with everyone that we're a team that represents experience in federal grant program design and implementation. We're here to support the Office of Department of Energy in any way that they need. We're listening to all of your feedback. We'll help incorporate it into the program narrative, and we're looking forward to working with you.
Thanks, Christy. To Bryson and your colleague want to introduce themselves, or?
If they are able to, yes, let's. Oh, yes, you are on camera. Yeah, please come off mute and please say hello.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Katie Toskey here. I serve in the Preparedness Division at Hagerty Consulting, and really excited to bring experience with statewide energy planning and grid resilience to this project. We're supporting other states with similar efforts. We're truly honored to be supporting ODO and look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Hey everyone, Bryson Shook here. I serve in the Recovery Division with Hagerty Consulting, and just want to echo Katie's sentiment as well as Christy's sentiment. We're excited to work with you and excited to just apply our knowledge from other projects to your project and really make this the best process for you. Look forward to working with you.
Great, thank you so much. All right, Rob, next slide. Moving on to public comments. Please raise your hand and you'll be called on to unmute yourself or type your question in the chat window. Please keep your comments and questions to under 3 minutes so that we have time for others. And as a reminder, if you are on the phone, you can press *6 to raise your hand and *3 to unmute yourself when we call on you. And I see that we have our first question or public comment for this slide, Brittany Davidson.
Okay,
yes.
Hi, my name is Brittany Davidson. I'm with Oregon Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Thank you for the presentation. I found it very helpful. We will be submitting comments later this week. But one thing that I just wanted to mention, especially after I'm looking at the map of the disadvantaged communities, so many of those will fall in the low, small utility sector. So I think it's unfortunate that that doesn't play a larger role in how the funds get dispersed. And while I understand Umatilla megawatt wise fits with the large utilities, I don't know if it's a good equivalence to put them with the large utilities. They serve 18,000 customers, PGE 800,000, Pacific Power 600,000. So I feel like that should kind of be taken into consideration too, not just their megawatt sales, but also the service areas and the number of folks that they serve. So thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. Appreciate that. Other comments? Janine, bringing you off mute here.
Hey, thank you, Janine Parisi, EWEB. Really appreciate the opportunity to weigh in and see how this is evolving. You know, when we got those first announcements about the IIJA funding for GRIP, you know, we're all really excited. We see these huge numbers, but as you learn more and more, if you're a small utility, you realize that your chance at getting a bite at the apple is very, very limited. We're going to be very challenged as smaller utilities to put together any kind of transformative project that is going to compete for national funding. So really the state formula grant is our best chance as smaller utilities to bring needed dollars for resiliency, wildfire mitigation, natural hazard mitigation to these communities. So I'm going to jump on the bandwagon and just encourage reconsidering minimum threshold. I know that that's not the cap. I understand that, qualifying projects that you'll be able to rejigger those funds. But really, the larger utilities are almost guaranteed dollars, and we are not. And along those lines, I just suggest that to the extent that Odo has any discretion here, I know you're following the federal mandates as well. But whether it's through technical support or just looking for ways to streamline the process and management for us, so that's commensurate with the award amounts, that the administrative burden is just scaled towards as much simplicity and management, reduced management burden as possible, so that we're really leveraging these dollars for community benefit for our customers versus trying to fill out all the paperwork and you know what it's like when it's a federal grant. So I know that would be my second major comment, is just make this as easy as possible for any of us who are lucky enough to get some of these dollars. Thank you.
Thanks, Janine. Appreciate that. Jennifer Jolly, we'll work to bring you off mute. There you go.
Thank you. I just want to echo the comments of Janine from eWeb in terms of making it simple for small utilities to apply for these grants. And, I mentioned some of the issues that I saw with the metrics proposed, and along those lines, maybe something to consider is to allow the utilities to address your objectives in a narrative rather than having strict metrics that we're trying to address in our applications. So anything that that makes it simple and that still can achieve your objectives, I think would be something we would really support.
Thanks, Jennifer. And if you recall back to the principles that we talked about at the beginning, I forget exactly how we stated it, but yes, making things as simple as possible and as clear as possible is certainly one of our goals. So as you're making comments on these, on the narrative, any suggestions you have like that on how to keep it simple for folks would be greatly appreciated. Other questions or comments? All right, Casey Fagan. Go ahead.
All right, this is Casey Fagan with Tillamook PUD. Just echoing the emphasis on the smaller utilities. I just finished a 4-year capital plan, and any of the projects I have that are targeting hazard mitigation strategies, the 600,000 limit, it won't fund any of them. The challenge is then I have to go out and get other funding sources. This underground project I mentioned in my comment is over 10 years we've been working on this. So now I got a timeline that hinders getting other funding to help a project. So it's going to be very, very difficult for us small utilities to pull everything together in time to meet even a 5-year time frame. And we don't know where funding's coming from. And you basically have to go out and pick a little bit of fruit here. Hopefully you can get more fruit. And then in the end, you don't even know if you can do the job. So changing that allocation back to where it was would help.
All right, thank you so much for that, Casey. Appreciate the feedback. Well, I see we are at time. Just a reminder that the portal for submitting public comments will be open through the end of the week, and we look forward to hearing more from folks on this webinar, as well as other folks who weren't able to make it. So thanks in advance for your time and thoughtfulness in putting together comments for us to help make sure that the Oregon Department of Energy's program narrative is as strong as possible. And then just a reminder that we will have time even after we submit our application to refine our approach before the program actually gets up and running sometime after this summer. So with that, I would see if my colleagues at Odo have any final comments. And if not, really, again, appreciate your time this morning and look forward to working with you to make our electric grid more resilient. Not seeing anything else, I'll go ahead and wrap us up. And thanks again, everyone.